3 extremely scary true New Year's night stories. Part 1. Hey everyone. Tonight we're drifting back to some New Year's Eves that didn't exactly end with champagne and confetti. Just settle in, maybe dim the lights, get comfortable. These are 3 true stories about people who thought they were celebrating the turn of a new year, but instead found themselves in situations they'd spend the rest of their lives trying to forget. New Year's Eve has this strange energy, doesn't it? Everyone's a little drunk, a little hopeful, a little reckless. The veil between one year and the next feels thin. And sometimes in that liminal space at midnight, things go very, very wrong. Let's begin. The Party in the Woods, Oregon, 1987. In December of 1987, a group of college students from Portland decided to ring in the new year somewhere remote. Because of course they did. They were tired of crowded bars and expensive cover charges, so they pooled their money, rented a cabin deep in the Cascade Range, and planned a weekend of drinking music and whatever else 20-year-olds do when there's no adult supervision. There were 8 of them total. The cabin belonged to someone's uncle, naturally, and it was about 40 minutes down a logging road that hadn't been plowed in weeks. They arrived on December 30th in 2 cars, both of which barely made it through the snow. The cabin was old, drafty, and smelled like mildew and firewood. Perfect, they thought, isolated, private. They spent the 30th drinking and playing cards. Someone brought a guitar. Someone else brought weed. The usual. By the time they went to bed, they were all pleasantly buzzed and looking forward to the next night's real celebration. December 31st started late. Most of them slept until noon. They spent the afternoon cooking, drinking beer, and exploring the woods around the cabin. One of the guys, Derek, found a deer carcass about 100 yards into the trees. It had been gutted and left in the snow, which seemed odd, but not terrifying. Hunters, probably. It was hunting season, after all. As the sun set, they built a bonfire outside and started drinking in earnest. Midnight was still hours away, but they were already loud, already reckless. Around 9 p.m., one of the girls, her name was Vanessa, thought she saw someone standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the firelight. She pointed, but by the time anyone looked, there was nothing there. Just trees and shadows. Probably a deer, someone said. Or a bear, someone else joked. They laughed and kept drinking. Around 11, they started hearing noises, footsteps in the snow circling the cabin. At first, they assumed it was one of their group messing around, but when they did a head count, everyone was accounted for. 8 people, all present. The footsteps continued, slow, deliberate, crunching through the snow. Derek grabbed a flashlight and went outside to investigate. The others followed because nobody wanted to be left inside alone. The footprints were there, clear as day in the snow. Human footprints, barefoot, in December, in Oregon, in the snow. The prints circled the cabin twice, then vanished into the woods. Some homeless guy, Derek said, though he didn't sound convinced. They went back inside and locked the door. The mood had shifted. It wasn't fun anymore. It was midnight now. 1988 had arrived, but nobody felt like celebrating. They sat in the living room, listening. The footsteps returned around 12:30. This time, there were voices, low, murmuring, like a conversation happening just outside the walls. One of the guys, Jason, opened the door and shouted into the darkness, "We're armed! Get the hell out of here!" They weren't armed, but it seemed like the thing to say. The voices stopped. For about 10 minutes there was silence. Then the scratching started, fingernails on wood, dragging slowly across the outside of the cabin. It moved from window to window, methodical and patient. Someone was testing the structure, looking for a way in. They called the police, but the nearest station was an hour away, and the roads were iced over. The dispatcher said someone would come as soon as possible. In the meantime, stay inside. Keep the doors locked. The scratching continued until about 2 a.m. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. They sat in that cabin, 8 terrified college kids staring at the door and waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. When the sun came up, they packed their things and left. They didn't wait for the police. They just drove back to Portland and never spoke about it again. Well, not publicly. Vanessa mentioned it years later in a Reddit thread, and that's how the story got out. Nobody knows who or what was outside that cabin. The police did eventually make it out there and found the footprints, but by then the snow had melted and refrozen, obscuring any useful details. No arrests were ever made. Derek still won't talk about it, says it was probably just some tweaker messing with them. But Vanessa swears the footprints were too deliberate, too careful, like whoever it was had been watching them for hours, learning their routines, waiting for the right moment. She never went camping again. The elevator. New York City, 1999. New York on New Year's Eve is chaos. Everyone knows this. 1 million people crammed into Times Square, waiting for a ball to drop while freezing their asses off. It's a spectacle, sure, but most locals avoid it. They stay home, or they go to parties in high-rise apartments where they can watch the fireworks from a distance. In 1999, the energy was different. Y2K was looming. People were either terrified or thrilled, and the parties that year had this manic, end-of-the-world vibe. Anything could happen at midnight. The computers might crash, the power grid might fail, planes might fall from the sky, or nothing would happen, and everyone would feel like idiots. A woman named Laura Chen was at one of those parties. She worked in finance and had been invited to a swanky event on the 43rd floor of a building in Midtown. Open bar, catered food, views of the city. She almost didn't go. She was exhausted from work, but her friends convinced her. It's the end of the millennium, they said. You can't stay home. So she went. The party was fine. Crowded, loud, full of people she didn't know. She drank champagne and made small talk and counted down the minutes until she could leave without seeming rude. By 11:30 she'd had enough. She told her friends she was heading out, grabbed her coat and made her way to the elevator. The building had 2 elevators, both of which were packed. She waited for the next available car, which took about 5 minutes. When the doors finally opened, it was empty. She stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. The doors closed. The elevator descended. And then it stopped. Not at a floor. Just stopped. Between floors. The lights flickered but stayed on. Laura pressed the lobby button again. Nothing. She pressed the emergency call button. A crackling voice answered. "Hello? Hi, I'm stuck in the elevator. Can you—" The line went dead. She tried again. No response. Okay, she thought. This is fine. This happens. Someone will notice. She waited. After about 10 minutes, the elevator jolted. Not up or down, sideways, like something had bumped it from the outside. Then it happened again. And again. The car was swaying now, rocking gently back and forth in the shaft. Laura pressed herself against the wall and tried not to panic. Then the lights went out. She stood in complete darkness, listening to the cables groan above her. Her phone had no signal. This was 1999, so cell reception in elevator shafts was non-existent. She was alone. And then she heard it. Breathing. Not her own, someone else's. Slow, wet, labored, coming from the corner of the elevator. She fumbled for the emergency light on her keychain and flicked it on. The tiny beam swept across the elevator. There was no one there, but the breathing continued. She pressed the emergency button again, over and over, screaming into the intercom. No one answered. The breathing got louder, closer, until it felt like it was right next to her ear. Then the elevator dropped. Not far, maybe a foot, but enough to make her stomach lurch. It caught itself with a metallic screech and hung there, swaying. Laura was crying now, hyperventilating, convinced she was about to die. And then, at exactly midnight, the lights came back on. The breathing stopped. The elevator hummed to life and descended smoothly to the lobby. The doors opened. She stumbled out into the bright, empty lobby. The security guard looked up from his desk, surprised. "You okay, miss?" She tried to explain what had happened, but he just shrugged. Y2K, probably. Computers went haywire for a minute. You're the 3rd person to get stuck tonight. She left the building and walked home in the freezing cold, too shaken to get in a cab. She didn't tell anyone about the breathing. Who would believe her? Years later, she learned that the building had a history. In the 1970s, a maintenance worker had died in one of the elevator shafts, fell from the top and landed at the bottom. His body wasn't found for 3 days. Laura doesn't take elevators anymore. She lives in a walk-up now, 5 floors, no exceptions. The house on Crescent Drive, Louisiana, 2003. Let's drift down south now. Louisiana. Humid, swampy, full of old houses that probably should have been torn down decades ago. On New Year's Eve 2003, a man named Marcus Thibodeau was house-sitting for his aunt. She'd gone to visit family in Texas and asked him to keep an eye on the place. It was a big, old Creole-style house on the outskirts of Baton Rouge, surrounded by oak trees and not much else. Marcus had spent summers there as a kid, so he knew the house well, or thought he did. He arrived on the 30th and spent the day cleaning, watching TV, trying to stay occupied. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you aware of every creak, every settling floorboard. On New Year's Eve, he decided to stay up and watch the ball drop. He made himself dinner, opened a beer, and settled in front of the TV. Around 10 p.m., he heard footsteps upstairs. He froze. The house was supposed to be empty. He muted the TV and listened. The footsteps continued. Slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth in the room directly above him, his aunt's bedroom. He grabbed a kitchen knife and climbed the stairs. The door to the bedroom was closed. He pressed his ear against it. The footsteps had stopped. He opened the door. The room was empty. He checked the closet, under the bed, behind the curtains. Nothing. Just an empty room. He went back downstairs, convinced he'd imagined it. At 11 p.m. the footsteps returned. This time they were louder, faster, like someone running, back and forth, frantic and urgent. Marcus called his aunt. No answer. He called his cousin. No answer. He thought about leaving, but it was his aunt's house and he'd promised to watch it, so he stayed. At midnight, the running stopped, and the whispering started. It was coming from everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, the floor. Dozens of voices, overlapping, unintelligible. Marcus stood in the living room with the knife in his hand, too terrified to move. Then the lights went out. He fumbled for his phone and turned on the flashlight. The whispering grew louder, angrier, like a crowd of people arguing. And then, in the beam of his flashlight, he saw them. Shadows. Not normal shadows. These were moving, crawling across the walls like living things. They had shapes, almost human but wrong. Too many limbs, heads bent at impossible angles. Marcus ran. He didn't grab his keys, didn't grab his coat. He just ran out the front door and didn't stop until he reached his car. He drove to a friend's house and spent the night there, shaking and incoherent. The next morning, he went back to the house with his cousin. Everything was normal. Lights worked. No shadows. No footsteps. No whispering. His aunt came home a few days later and laughed when he told her what happened. "Oh, that," she said casually. "The house does that sometimes, especially on holidays." "Does what?" Marcus asked. "Gets restless." She didn't elaborate. Marcus never house-sat for her again. And there you have it, 3 New Year's Eves that went horribly, inexplicably wrong. Maybe it's something about the date. Maybe it's just bad luck. Or maybe, when the calendar flips and everyone's focused on what comes next, the things that live in the dark decide to come out and play. Let's keep drifting. There's more to come.